The rain fell like needles against the hangar roof at RAF Middle Wallop, and Flight Lieutenant Thomas Archer watched two civilian technicians bolt metal rods to the nose of his Beaufighter. The antennas jutted outward like the legs of some mechanical insect, ugly and strange. Archer had flown Spitfires during the Channel battles, had watched his wingmen spiral into the sea trailing smoke, had earned his medals in daylight where a man could see his enemy. Now they wanted him to hunt in darkness using equipment that half the squadron called garbage. November 1940. London burned every night. The Luftwaffe sent their Heinkels and Junkers across the Channel under cover of blackness, and Fighter Command could do almost nothing to stop them. The single-seat Hurricanes scrambled with searchlights guiding them found nothing but empty sky. Civilians died by the hundreds while pilots circled uselessly above the flames. Air Vice Marshal Dowding had staked everything on a desperate gamble: airborne radar. The AI Mark IV system could supposedly detect enemy aircraft in total darkness, guiding fighters close enough to make visual contact and attack. In theory, it was revolutionary. In practice, the sets malfunctioned constantly. False readings. Sudden blackouts. Most crews flew with the radar switched off, trusting their eyes and their luck. Archer's new radar operator arrived that afternoon. Sergeant William Marsh was 22 years old, pale and thin, with the flat vowels of Manchester in his voice. He carried a technical manual under his arm like a schoolboy with a favorite book. The other operators called him Billy and mocked him for believing the propaganda about the radar actually working. Billy ignored them. He had spent his nights studying the equipment by flashlight, memorizing frequencies and ranges, learning to read the twin cathode ray tubes that displayed targets as dancing blips of light. He believed in the machine when no one else did. Their first patrol together was a disaster. The radar picked up ghosts everywhere, phantom contacts that vanished when Archer turned to intercept. Billy called out bearings and ranges while Archer cursed and banked through empty cloud. They landed at dawn having seen nothing, accomplished nothing. Archer climbed out of the cockpit without speaking. He walked to the mess and drank tea alone while the other pilots exchanged knowing glances. Another wasted night. Another failure, but Billy refused to give up. He spent the next week adjusting the radar set, fine-tuning its sensitivity, learning its moods and quirks. He discovered that temperature affected performance, that certain altitudes produced clearer readings, that patience and gentle hands could coax the equipment into cooperation. When Archer dismissed his efforts, Billy stood his ground. The technology works, he insisted. We just need to understand it. On the night of November 19, they scrambled to intercept a raid heading for the Midlands. Ground control vectored them southeast over the Sussex coast, altitude 18,000 feet. Billy hunched over his radar display, watching the green glow of the cathode tubes, and then he saw it, a solid contact, bearing 170, range 4 miles and closing. He called out the numbers, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. Archer adjusted course, skeptical but following the guidance. 3 miles. 2 miles. The contact held firm, and then, through a gap in the clouds, moonlight caught the silhouette of a Junkers 88. Twin engines. Glass nose. Iron crosses on the wings. The German bomber flew level and unaware, its crew confident in the protection of darkness. Archer felt his breath catch. The radar had found it. The impossible machine had actually found a target in the black void of night that he lined up behind the bomber, close to 200 yards, and pressed the firing button. 420mm cannons roared. Tracer rounds stitched across the Junkers, punching through metal and glass. The bomber shuddered, rolled, and fell away trailing fire. It hit the Channel 3 minutes later. No parachutes, they landed as the sky turned gray with dawn. Neither man spoke for a long time. Ground crew swarmed the Beaufighter, checking for damage, and Archer sat motionless in the cockpit. He had killed before, but never like this. Never by trusting something he could not see. Billy appeared at the wing. His face was pale but his eyes were bright. It worked, he said quietly. Archer nodded. It worked. By noon, word had reached the Air Ministry. The first confirmed radar-guided night kill of the war. Intelligence officers arrived from London with questions and orders. "Train the other crews," they said. "Teach them what you learned." But there was a condition: absolute secrecy about the radar. The public would hear a different story. Something about carrots and exceptional night vision. A necessary deception. Archer looked at Billy, the young sergeant who believed when no one else did. Perhaps the darkness was not so absolute after all. Perhaps they had found a way to see. Outside, clouds gathered over Hampshire, and somewhere across the channel, the bombers were preparing for another night. The propaganda poster appeared across Britain in January 1941, a smiling pilot beneath the words, "Carrots keep you healthy, ask the RAF." The lie spread through newspapers and radio broadcasts, a carefully constructed myth to hide the truth about airborne radar. Flight Lieutenant John Cunningham became the public face of the campaign, nicknamed "Cat's Eyes" for his supposedly supernatural night vision. In reality, Cunningham sat in briefing rooms at Middle Wallop with bloodshot eyes and trembling hands, exhausted from missions that the civilian population would never understand. The Blitz had entered its cruelest phase. German bombers struck every major city in Britain, killing thousands, leaving entire neighborhoods in rubble. Coventry had been devastated in November. Southampton, Birmingham, and Liverpool followed. The Luftwaffe flew with impunity under cover of darkness, and the British people looked to the sky and saw only flames, but something was changing. The AI Mark IV radar, once dismissed as worthless, was beginning to prove itself. Ground-controlled interception stations along the coast could now track incoming raids and vector night fighters within range of the airborne radar sets. The system required precise coordination between ground controllers and aircraft crews, a delicate dance of radio calls and instrument readings. When it worked, the results were devastating. When it failed, bombers slipped through untouched. Thomas Archer emerged as one of 604 Squadron's most reliable pilots. He flew almost every night, pushing himself beyond exhaustion, haunted by the faces of the dead. Every bomber that escaped meant families burned in their homes, children crushed beneath falling walls. The weight of it pressed against his chest until breathing became difficult. He stopped eating regular meals. He stopped sleeping more than a few hours at a time. The other pilots noticed but said nothing. They understood. Billy Marsh became his anchor. The young radar operator had developed an almost intuitive connection with the equipment, sensing malfunctions before they occurred, coaxing the temperamental sets into compliance. Other operators sought his advice. He taught them to read the displays, to interpret the dancing blips of light, to trust the machine when their instincts screamed otherwise. The AI radar was not worthless, Billy insisted. It was misunderstood. Like any tool, it required skill and patience. Tension mounted within the squadron when Flight Lieutenant Marcus Webb arrived from a staff position in London. Webb came from an old military family with connections to the Air Ministry. He despised the radar, calling it a crutch for pilots who lacked the courage to fight properly. Real aviators trusted their eyes and their reflexes, not gadgets built by civilians. He flew his missions with the radar switched off, relying on searchlights and luck, and he made certain everyone knew it. The clash between Archer and Webb became inevitable. It erupted one evening in the officers' mess after a particularly brutal raid on London. Webb accused Archer of hiding behind technology instead of engaging the enemy like a man. Archer's response was cold and precise. "You were not there during the Channel battles," he said. "I was. I watched good men die because we were outmatched. This radar gives us a chance. Perhaps the only chance we will get." Webb sneered but offered no reply. The other pilots watched in silence. March brought the heaviest raids yet. On the night of the 19th, over 500 bombers crossed the Channel to strike London. Every available Beaufighter scrambled. The GCI stations coordinated multiple interceptions simultaneously, feeding information to aircraft scattered across southern England. For the first time, the entire system functioned as designed. Archer and Billy intercepted two Heinkel 111s in 90 minutes, both confirmed destroyed. Elsewhere, other crews reported kills. The squadron claimed 8 bombers that night, a record. The radar was working. The training was paying off. The darkness had become a hunting ground, but Marcus Webb, flying without radar guidance, attempted to intercept a damaged bomber by visual contact alone. He misjudged the distance and collided with his target. Both aircraft fell in flames. Webb survived but suffered severe burns across his face and hands. His career as a fighter pilot ended that night. Archer visited him in the hospital 3 days later. Webb lay wrapped in bandages, barely conscious, and Archer stood at the foot of the bed without speaking. There was nothing to say. The old ways were dying. The war had moved beyond what any single pilot could accomplish alone. Victory now belonged to those who could see in the dark. Outside, spring rain washed the runways clean, and the bombers kept coming. The captured Luftwaffe pilot sat in an interrogation room at RAF Tangmere, his flight suit still stained with oil from his burning aircraft. A British intelligence officer watched him through cigarette smoke. The Germans' hands would not stop shaking. "We called them Teufel im Dunkeln," he said. "The devil in the dark. Your fighters appear from nowhere. They see everything. How is this possible?" The intelligence officer smiled and offered only one word, carrots.by. April 1941, word had spread through Luftwaffe squadrons that British night defenses were no longer blind. Bomber losses mounted. Crews who had once flown over England with impunity now scanned the darkness for hunters they could not see. The German Air Ministry responded with new tactics. Rear gunners received additional training. Bombers flew in tighter formations for mutual protection. Navigation routes became unpredictable, weaving across the channel to avoid the invisible web of radar stations along the British coast. The hunting had become more dangerous. Thomas Archer felt the change on every mission. German gunners were waiting now, spraying fire into the blackness at the first hint of pursuit. The easy kills had vanished. Each interception became a duel fought at 400 miles per hour through clouds and anti-aircraft fire, neither side able to see the other until the final seconds. One night in April, a burst of machine gun rounds tore through Archer's Beaufighter, missing Billy's head by inches. The radar set took a direct hit and went dark. They limped home navigating by stars alone, neither man speaking until they touched down at Middle Wallop. The squadron lost 3 crews that month. Archer attended the funerals with mechanical precision, the folded flags, the rifle volleys, the weeping families who would never understand what their sons and husbands had accomplished. He began talking to himself during missions, muttering instructions and prayers into the intercom. Billy noticed but said nothing. The weight of the dead was crushing them both. One evening Billy found Archer alone in the dispersal hut, staring at a map of southern England covered with pins marking bombing targets. "You cannot save everyone," Billy said quietly. Archer did not look up. "Then what is the point?" Billy sat down across from him. "The point is holding the line. Every bomber we stop means people who get to live. Mothers. Children. That is all we can do. That is all anyone can do." May arrived with longer days and shorter nights. The Luftwaffe adjusted their timing, launching raids in the narrow window of darkness, pushing their crews to cross the channel and return before dawn exposed them to British fighters. Intelligence reports suggested something larger was coming. Hitler was massing forces in the east for an invasion of the Soviet Union. The bombing campaign against Britain might soon end, but first the Germans intended to deliver a final devastating blow. It came on the night of May 10. Over 500 aircraft crossed the channel in the largest raid of the entire Blitz. Their target was London. The House of Commons took a direct hit. Westminster Abbey burned. Hospitals and churches collapsed into rubble. Across the city, fires merged into infernos that consumed entire blocks. Every Beaufighter at Middle Wallop scrambled. Archer and Billy climbed into a sky already scarlet with distant flames. Ground control fed them vectors, and Billy hunched over his radar display, calling out contacts in a voice that never wavered. They intercepted their first bomber over Kent, a Heinkel 111 caught climbing after releasing its payload. Archer closed to 100 yards and fired. The Heinkel exploded. They found another over Essex and sent it spinning into the darkness. Then a third south of the Thames. By midnight, they had destroyed 4 enemy aircraft. The 5th engagement nearly killed them both. Their cannon jammed after a sustained burst, leaving only the wing-mounted machine guns functional. A Heinkel turned to fight, its dorsal gunner raking the Beaufighter with accurate fire. Rounds punched through the fuselage. Billy cried out as shrapnel tore into his shoulder. Archer made a decision that defied every instinct of self-preservation. He slammed the throttle forward and brought the Beaufighter alongside the Heinkel, so close he could see the German pilot's face illuminated by instrument lights. Then he fired the machine guns at point-blank range, pouring rounds into the bomber's cockpit and engines. The Heinkel exploded. Debris hammered the Beaufighter. The port engine caught fire. Archer fought the controls as the aircraft shuddered and dropped. He found an emergency airfield, a grass strip meant for training planes, and brought the crippled fighter down in a barely controlled crash. The Beaufighter tore through a hedge and stopped with its nose buried in mud. Ground crew dragged them from the wreckage. Billy was unconscious, bleeding badly, but alive. The doctor said he would survive. The raid on May 10 was the last major attack of the Blitz. Within weeks, the Luftwaffe turned east. The night war over Britain had ended. They had held the line. Summer light filled the courtyard at Buckingham Palace as Thomas Archer and William Marsh stood before the King of England. The ceremony was brief and formal. Distinguished flying crosses pinned to their chests, handshakes exchanged, photographers capturing the moment for newspapers that would print the images alongside stories about heroic pilots with exceptional night vision. The lie persisted even now. Neither man smiled. Afterward, they walked through the palace gardens without speaking. The medals felt heavy against their uniforms. Billy turned his over in his fingers, examining the silver cross with its propeller blades. "Feels strange," he said finally. "Getting rewarded for the work of a machine." Archer shook his head. "The machine did not do it alone. Neither did we." June 1941 brought a strange quiet to the night skies over Britain. The Luftwaffe still launched raids, but they were smaller now, retaliatory strikes and harassment attacks rather than the devastating assaults of the previous winter. Hitler had turned his attention eastward. Operation Barbarossa began on June 22, and 3 million German soldiers poured across the Soviet border. The bombers that had terrorized London were now needed elsewhere. The night fighter squadrons remained vigilant. New technology was arriving. The AI Mark 8 used centimetric radar, shorter wavelengths that produced sharper images and greater range. The bulky Beaufighters were being replaced by de Havilland Mosquitoes, faster and more agile, built from lightweight plywood that made them nearly invisible to German detection equipment. Everything was evolving. The lessons learned during the Blitz were being refined into doctrine that would shape aerial warfare for generations. Archer received a promotion to squadron leader. The Air Ministry offered him a staff position in London, a desk job away from combat, recognition for his service and sacrifice. He turned it down without hesitation. "I am not finished flying," he told them. The night war might have paused, but it had not ended. German bombers would return. They always returned. Billy's recovery took longer. The shrapnel wounds in his shoulder healed, but the nerve damage remained. His right hand could no longer operate the radar controls with the precision required for combat interceptions. The doctors delivered the news with clinical detachment, and Billy accepted it without argument. He requested a transfer to a training unit at RAF Cranfield, where new radar operators learned the skills that might save their lives. On his last night at Middle Wallop, Archer found Billy in the officers' mess. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the summer warmth. They shared whiskey in silence, watching the flames dance. Outside, the sky darkened toward twilight, the brief English night settling over the airfield. "When I first arrived here," Billy said quietly, "they told me the radar was worthless. A toy for scientists. Said it would never work in combat." Archer nodded. They were wrong. Billy turned his glass slowly. They were afraid. Afraid of something they did not understand. But we understood it. Or at least we tried. And that made all the difference. They shook hands at dawn. Billy climbed into a transport aircraft bound for Cranfield, and Archer watched until it disappeared into the clouds. He never saw his radar operator again. The war continued for 4 more years. Archer flew Mosquitoes over occupied Europe, hunting German night fighters with radar systems far more advanced than the primitive Mark IV that had changed everything. He survived the conflict, though many of his comrades did not. The skills developed during the Blitz proved decisive. By 1943, RAF night fighters equipped with centimetric radar were devastating Luftwaffe bombers attempting to defend German cities. The hunters had become the hunted. Billy trained hundreds of radar operators at Cranfield. He taught them to trust the equipment, to read the displays, to work as partners with their pilots rather than passengers. Many of his students went on to fly combat missions over Germany and the Pacific. Some did not return. Billy kept their photographs in his quarters, arranged in neat rows, and he remembered each of their names. The AI Mark IV radar, once dismissed as worthless, contributed to the destruction of approximately 600 enemy aircraft during the war. The exact number remains disputed by historians, but the impact is not. Airborne interception radar transformed night warfare from a contest of luck and eyesight into a technological discipline. The darkness that had protected bombers for centuries became a liability. Those who could see in the night held absolute advantage. Years later, an aging Thomas Archer stood before a display case in the Imperial War Museum. Inside was a fragment of AI Mark IV radar equipment, battered and corroded, salvaged from a crashed Beaufighter. A small plaque read, Airborne Interception Radar, Mark IV. Used by RAF night fighters during the Blitz, 1940 to 1941. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve nearby. "What is that?" Archer did not realize he had spoken aloud until the words were already gone. "That," he said quietly, "is how we learn to see in the dark." That he walked out into the afternoon sunlight, the museum doors closing softly behind him. Somewhere in the distance, an aircraft engine hummed against the sky. The war was long over. The darkness remained conquered.